Hey, Broden, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Good. So, Professor, one of the things I always and I like to ask is kind of like where we get started in as in our academic fields, our interest to create. And I kind of wonder, and I'd like you to tell us about your journey academically and also your journey of finding your creative fields of what you create in. And I would love for you to share your story.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I'm a professor at University of Wyoming, and I've been here for almost 18 years now. I came here from Chicago originally. Um, and yeah, it's Wyoming has grown on me over those
Mm,
years.
yeah.
I was looking at one of your other videos and one of your other conversations, and I saw that you're from northern Colorado or northwestern Colorado. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. I'm from I was born in Steamboat, but I lived in Craig for most of my life.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what year were you at University of Denver?
I'm currently entering my sophomore year at CU Denver.
Okay. And what
Yeah.
are you studying?
So right now I am majoring in film, but I also am doing a minor study in history because a lot of the films I am hoping to do, my projects are based in history. So my creative field is mainly through writing scripts and filmmaking. So I love writing, and so that's why, that's how I found you. I think not only through screenplays, but others writing fields like poetry and nonfiction short stories are amazing mediums that I found a lot of inspiration in. So that's kind of where it led me to you.
Great, great. And so you found my name off of the website and kind of did some online research of me. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I kind of just go through departments of fields that I like, and I kind of see
Gotcha.
what some faculty have done and which ones stick out to me the most. And I saw yours and it looked awesome. It looked great. There was one short story that I read. Let me make sure this is the right one. Yeah, Humility, which I read, and I thought that one was really cool. I thought that one was very sad, but I thought it was really cool, and I thought it was very well written. And so I had a few questions about that I was going to bring up later. But yeah, that's how I found you.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. It's neat. You actually found me, and I'm gonna come back to your first question too,
Of
but we
course, yeah,
can.
no worries. Go ahead.
Um, at an interesting time. I think the day you contacted me a couple weeks ago, and right before that, like the day before you'd contacted me, I heard that in all these years, my first novel is going to get published by the small press in Los Angeles. And so that was kind of uh, some neat news this summer.
That's
Um,
amazing to
fall
hear.
fall of 2026. So kind of, and I've been suddenly learning. I mean, I kind of knew tangentially about that process, but learning for myself what that process is and talking with my editor at this place. It's called What Books Press. And
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. I'm kind of doing a plug here, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Um, but yeah, so that is, something that is after writing five novels in my time being a teacher and just turning to writing in my life, which I did more fully, probably, I don't know, 2000. I mean, I'd been, writing before that, but that's when I went back to grad school
Yeah.
and really just started focusing on writing and over that time I've written five novels and this is my fifth one finally. And believe me, I've sent those out as well over over time, but I feel like the last two that I've written have become um, I've my writing has changed a lot and I've, gone in a different direction with it and it feels a lot more real. And my wife is one who reads a lot of it, and she said, "Yeah, it's a very different feeling." So, if
Mm.
anybody who ever watches this, if you keep writing and I know it's the old cliche, right? Like at some point, you you'll hopefully have success with it if you just keep doing it. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, going back to your question, Yeah, I mean that kind of fits into it, right? Like I first moved, I was a philosophy major as an undergrad. And then after that, I really started reading, and I feel like my life as a writer is basically my life as a reader.
Mm.
I feel like if you're not reading, you're not, you're just, it's imagine being a filmmaker and saying, I don't think I need to watch movies, but I'll be a filmmaker, right?
Yeah,
It's kind of the same thing. To me, it feels that way as well. Um, I just did a ton of reading after I graduated. I didn't go back to grad school for 9 years. I was just kind of moving around the country,
yeah,
just doing the Kerouacian beat generation. I'm just going to move around and go to different cities and get involved in their economies and, get jobs and stuff and just see what's out there. So that was kind of I think my literary influences back then made me think that, nonconformity and just hitting the road and just, doing different things in my life rather than just immediately going into a 9 to 5 job or immediately going back to grad school or something like that. Um, yeah, and I went to a bunch of friends and I went to Los Angeles at first, and we were gonna write screenplays and have this artist collective and make movies and be actors and everything. I still have some friends there many years later now who are still, a lot of us have families now, but we're still just trying to do that, still acting and writing.
yeah,
Um, I lived in Oregon for a while, but the whole time just really doing a lot of reading, doing and just trying to, write as I could until I finally, turned 30 and thought I had to go back to grad school and focus my life a little bit more. And yeah, and then I got my PhD in English and creative writing, which you can do. There's some schools where you can do that.
yeah.
And so I did that. I don't know, does University of Denver, I don't think they have a PhD in creative writing, do they?
I don't believe they do. No, most of their higher graduate programs are more in the STEM and business field.
Okay,
They're more focused on that more than I think than some of the creative fields. Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, so I went back to school and did that. And, all this time as I said, I was writing mostly fiction, novels, maybe some creative nonfiction within that. But I was focusing on fiction and then moved to Wyoming, got my wife and I got these jobs here at University of Wyoming, and we've been here ever since. So yeah, and within that, I've had a job that has allowed me to explore different avenues of creativity and writing, which has been great. So I took a 5 year detour into poetry
yeah,
right before I wrote these last two novels that um, the the second one of which is coming out. That totally changed how I thought about writing as well, like really focusing on this different genre for a number of years.
I'm also interested in the fact that simply with the word progression, one thing I kind of wanted to ask as well is that throughout your time as you have gone through life in general, more broadly, I wonder what are some of the things that have kind of influenced your writing the most. I think some of us have these certain events or these certain cascading events that kind of lead into what we write about or what we create about. And I wonder, what were some of those for you, whether it be within your academic life, personal life, or maybe throughout some of previous jobs you may have had. I wonder what has kind of led you to think about, what you write about, when do you write about it, and kind of influence you overall.
Right? I think a lot of what I write is, one might call it autofiction, right? Writing, it's pretty close to what my life is, even though I guess the story you read, Humility, isn't very close to my life at all.
Yeah,
But I would say that going to that story for a second here,
yeah,
um, a lot of what I do has this sort of, I try to play with fiction. That story itself is in second person. And I think that that's kind of my personality in a way that comes out in it. It's always kind of this ironic detachment or trying to be playful with the work or perhaps just clever in some way, but not not in a smarmy way, but just trying to
Yeah.
just kind of using the genre and trying to play with it more than doing the following the straight I don't know, getting rid of the furniture of fiction as we know it and
Yeah.
pushing that to the side and trying to come at it from these more experimental angles or different angles. Um, so I think that that's my personality itself is kind of like that anyway. And so the things that have happened in my life, I think I try to strain through that,
Mm.
through my
Yeah.
personality in that way. So, I mean, certain things, yeah, jobs. I worked as a proofreader for a while at a law firm, and I think that, I've been trying to put that into some kind of writing, just this 9 to 5 job and how that, just the basics of that and how to maybe turn that on its head a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, it's always turning whatever is presented to me on its head a little bit. It's always in any situation, walking around or, in living life, it's always like, what if this would happen? What if this would turn things in a different way? Like, how could that turn into a piece of fiction?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's jobs I've had, as you mentioned, being a proofreader at a law firm. Grad school, I think, yeah, I think being with students a lot and just seeing what they're doing has made me rethink, even in an intro class, has made me rethink my own work. It makes me constantly refresh it
Yeah.
in a certain way. I think pa family stuff. I write about. I have a wife and a son. My son's a 16-year-old. But especially in this latest novel that's going to come out, they are thinly veiled versions of them, right? So I think my family life very much comes into my writing.
Yeah.
Um, having more on a more powerful level, I think having family members die
Yeah.
has been a part of I think I've strained that through my um, personality and in my fiction as well.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I mean, it's one of the main reasons why I asked that question is because I think it's interesting looking back on ourselves as creative people and looking at what were the things that made us think certain ways to make us create certain things to show what we had felt or what we had thought or what we think. And one thing I am always looking for, or I'm always kind of trying to be more introspective about now is the voice that we have as writers, as creative people in general, as humans in general, the voices that we have to kind of share our perspective. And to go back again just a little bit, I kind of wanted to, thinking about your voice as a creative person, what, when did writing, kind of become your calling? I think that, I'll give you an example. Like did not, I was not a very creative person growing up. I remember, going throughout high school, wanting to go into more scientific lines of work. But I think things happened in my life that changed what I wanted to do, and I started becoming more of a creative person, going down more creative career paths. And I wonder, what was it for you that kind of called you to writing?
Yeah, I'm kind of like you, Broden. I didn't really think about a creative path when I was, a lot of writers talk about, oh, I started reading and I started writing when I was 7 years old, 8 years old. Yeah, I wasn't like that.
Yeah,
I I was just, I don't know, as a kid, just doing kid things, right? Or in
yeah,
high school, you know, I I really didn't start writing until after college even.
yeah,
I was a philosophy major in college, and I think thinking about the world in that way was, oh, I think that was always appealing to me, like the bigger issues or more abstract ways of thinking about the world became something I was really interested in and pursued that in college. And I think maybe that dovetailed with literature. Like I took some English classes at college as my undergrad anyway, and I think those two things dovetail together because literature became a better way for me to explore bigger ideas or thinking philosophically about the world
Yeah.
rather than pure philosophical texts. Even though, those are always I, I'll dive into that every now and then, but I'd rather explore it through characters and through literature. And so, yeah, I think reading, as I said before, just suddenly diving into that after college, and I just read, as much as I possibly could, as much as I possibly could, and I think I still do that today. Wherever you read one author who suggests another author, and then you go in that direction, right? And you find
Yeah.
one you like and just read all their work. And then, I think it's just this layering, this archaeological layering of writers that I've had over my lifetime. And I look back at your age, looking back at ones then who I really loved, and you know, they almost feel like past loves in a way. Maybe I wouldn't go back to that writing at all, but I remember it fondly from that time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the yeah, and I think that's a really good way to even describe looking at some of the past things that we have enjoyed creatively, but now aren't really isn't really what we're into anymore. There's plenty of things, um that I enjoyed maybe, when I first started getting into writing and filmmaking, that kind of inspired me to who and where I am now. But I kind of look back and I'm like, that's just not what I'm into anymore. That's just not even my goal anymore. But you still have to give, I think, appreciation and thanks to it because, you wouldn't be where you are if it wasn't for the thoughts and inspirations and ideas it gave you. And, another thing that I was kind of thinking about today in preparation for us talking was kind of thinking about, writing as a whole, but, there's different genres and forms of writing, short stories, poetries, nonfiction, fiction, all screenplays, even. And I kind of wonder, I think, as writers specifically, um, we can go from each form to another. You can go from poetry to short stories to screenplays to fiction, nonfiction. And I kind of wonder because you were bringing up earlier that, you delve into poetry. I wonder it's from your perspective at least, like how do you approach each form of writing and and what draws you to certain ones more than others?
I think with fiction, maybe I got burnt out on having to follow some kind of narrative, and you're probably all your teachers say you have, and this is within screenwriting as well, because I've written several screenplays too.
Yeah,
What's the tension?
yeah,
What's the conflict? That's always the number one thing that I'm sure your teachers will tell you, right? And I tell my students that,
hmm,
if you have a story with no conflict in it, and unless the voice of that character is so strong to overcome, so stylistic to overcome not having that tension.
yeah,
uh, you want to have that in a story. That's how it differs from all our lives are filled with tension, that's how it differs from just our humdrum, mundane lives.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think I was wanting to get away from that and just having to, again, as the structure of fiction, the scaffolding of fiction. And so that's why I went into poetry. And going through that and just, I can just express my emotion. I can, in this very condensed form, I can express the single emotion that I'm feeling right now. And it felt like I was maybe slowing down my own my own self in a way or my own thoughts so I could really linger on words. Maybe that's a good word for it too. What I experienced is just kind of this lingering
mhm,
that I wasn't allowing myself in in prose, in narrative prose, even in
yeah,
creative nonfiction essays, right? You're still trying to get to this end, even if they're short, you're starting somewhere, and there should, what I always tell my students, especially in creative nonfiction, is to have some kind of discovery at some point, some kind of self-discovery by the end, and maybe even some tension. So in that way, it does mirror fiction in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I was allowed to step outside of that with poetry, and I really enjoyed that for these 5 years. I thought, it just expanded the way I was thinking about writing. Language became more flirtatious in a way. Like I
Yeah.
was able to delve into words and go into, different routes that poetic lines were taking me that I wasn't allowed to in fiction. Um, but then I don't know, something happened. Maybe I felt like it was enough. I had done that, I had learned that in a way. I mean, as a teacher, I think poetry is the thing I don't like to teach the most. I mean, I
Mm.
know fiction, my bread and butter is prose, right? Fiction, creative nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I can teach poetry, but I kind of like to reserve it for myself in a way,
Yeah.
like, just what it does for my own writing. But then yeah, shifted back to fiction, and I think it really changed how I mentally, that kind of ephemeral thing that what do you do as a writer? It's just so hard to pin that down. Even talking like this, it's so hard to pin it down.
Yeah. I
Um,
th I think it's one of those things that kind of like just changes, I think our processes just change over time. I think about when I used to um I mostly when I write I mostly write screenplays. So I think that's a different animal within itself. But even then I think they're still relatable because I I think about how I would write, a year or two ago, and then I look at the way I write now and it's constantly evolving. And maybe as you grow into your career as a writer, maybe it kind of stagnates a little bit, but still, I just think, it's just constantly evolving. And so I think it's really interesting to hear that, when you kind of delve into poetry and then went back to fiction, it kind of changed, which I think is wonderful because I think it gives you a new insight into and a new process that you can use to write. And speaking of, processes, I kind of wonder, like what has been and what is now, some of the main things of your process, like what are you more of a mapper, or do you kind of, go just off of a feeling and just start to write? I kind of wonder, what that is for you, what sparks, what is that,
I would say that I became more vertical in my writing. And what I mean by that is I talked earlier about being clever or, being playful. And I think there was this kind of ironic detachment in my writing. And I think that's still on there on the surface, but I think these years of poetry taught me to be more vertical, like going down, digging down into not only the language, but also my emotional self. And I think trying to stir that up a little bit and bring that to the surface of the writing. And again, it's so hard to talk about these things, right? Like how do
yeah.
they manifest themselves? But I think that that's something that I hadn't done as much before, and I think that really helped to shape my writing and brought it to a different place that was more enjoyable for me as I was reading, and hopefully others too. I know my wife thought, it was she said this is a very different style. I haven't seen this before. So it shifted for her as well. Um, but yeah, just bringing up those things and sitting down each day. I always like to write later in the day, like when I've been beaten about,
Yeah.
when the day has kind of knocked me around a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd rather do it then than early and just, sit down with whatever tensions or whatever's happened to me during the day, even though I'm not writing specifically about them, but just getting that feeling and letting things bubble up into that, from that feeling or whatever the day has given me and exploring, my unconscious that way, I guess.
And first of all, I can say that I also write later in the day. I cannot never do it in the morning.
Yeah.
But, I think it's also interesting how, at least to, my perspective, I think that it is hard to talk about it because I think it's hard to describe in words sometimes because we just do it, subconsciously. I think sometimes when we just start to write, you just start to think about things and, little ideas that you may have collected throughout the day and are starting to put down. And one thing I've kind of like slowly realized over time, I think, and I think, this conversation is making me think about it more. I think it's making me have an introspective lens on what exactly sparks ideas. And I think it's just, day-to-day life, and I think, I used to have this belief, I used to have this idea in my head that like, oh, well, all of my ideas come from some grander, like they probably trickled down from other things and landed onto me. But I think they can just appear out of thin air, even just, seeing something on my phone can just give that, or,
Hmm.
maybe reading a newspaper or whatever it may be, just seeing something, it could literally be a sound, it could be anything. And so what that then makes me think about is, like where we position ourselves and how that affects what we create and what we think about and what ideas we come up with. And, one thing I wanted to kind of lead this into, I think, was, positioning. And I wanted to ask, with your position and role as a teacher, I kind of wonder how that has affected your creative work and how it maybe has changed, or maybe has enlightened your approach to writing in general.
I can give you a very specific example. Um, Obviously, I bring intro to writing class, even in my upper level classes. There's certain rules you have to follow in fiction in general,
Yeah.
especially starting out, right? Like you can't. I try to get students to do more straightforward thing, follow, the Freytag pyramid, the structure of a story,
Yeah.
you know, tension, rising action, climax, resolution, that kind of thing. Um, but then letting them experiment as the semesters go along. But I think in myself teaching this and teaching these basic things, I try to, I think I keep learning and like, what are the important things or what can I take away from teaching this? This is formulaic thing, but how can I push against that? And one way that I've really started to think about fiction differently, and I am now telling my students this, is to really get into the interior monologue of a character. Like that's basically the one thing out of all the arts that fiction can offer that no other art form can offer, like really getting deeply into a character's head. I mean, think about it. I mean, I guess you can, in film, you can have a voiceover, the narrator can have a voiceover, but you're not really, getting deeply into the thoughts and the very tiny thoughts. And as you're saying, how a character goes through a day and how these things are influencing a character. So I have my students like even go before writing a story, just really do this interior monologue of a character first. Um, and I think that's one thing that directly through teaching has helped me to think about my own writing. And maybe that was poetry too. Just the idea of getting deeper into one's head and exploring language at like you're saying, that subconscious level. And I've been, I always look for writers now who are doing that and do that well. One writer, and he's from 100 years ago, Theodore Dreiser. Have you ever read any of his work?
I have not.
Um, let's see, Sister Carrie is one of his books. An American Tragedy is kind of like one of the first American crime fiction books. which we're as a society we're so interested in now.
Yeah.
Um, but he does this amazing job, even though it's dated in certain ways. It came out in 1925, an American tragedy. The way he gets into a character's head is it just seems timeless, and I just
Mm.
have been taking so much from that. Um, I should bring some of that. I just started reading it this year or this summer, so I might bring some of that to class once
Yeah.
fall rolls around. But yeah, so I think that's a way that teaching them some of the basic elements, and suddenly I'm pushing against that and trying to find out, you know, what works for me, and hopefully bringing that to class as well. I don't know. How do you feel about? I mean, that's an interesting as a filmmaker and script writer. How can one do that? And maybe some of the best movies, you're able to touch upon that, even though you can't do it as directly as you do in fiction.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the inner monologue is interesting because I almost see it as like world building on a smaller scale. Because I think one of the first things I try to, I think, do if I begin to write a screenplay, as is what I mostly write now, I always think about the world and why things are the way that they are, cause and effect, what is the world that this is in, and then I sort of then start creating characters and what their intentions and their beliefs and their social and economic status, and it just kind of trickles down from there. But you bring up a good point. It is more difficult and or complex to, I think, do that with film because it's very easy to be on the nose, and I think you have to be clever with the way you do that because I think um with writing, it's words and that's a very confined world that you work in. And I think with film, it's everything. It's audio and visual. And so I think to answer that, how you could kind of do that, I think rather than an inner monologue, I think you can start just looking at the first thing that comes to mind is production design. If you want to look at a character's inner monologue, look at their room. What is their room? Is it messy? Is it clean? What do they are they do they have decorations? Or are they clean and minimalistic and have no sense of individuality? Those are some of the things that just kind of come to my head.
Hmm.
Um, and what are their actions, like one thing I always kind of think about when I think about characters are how clean are their fingernails. Like I feel like
Right.
that's like one of the main things I kind of think about when I just start thinking about like characters and kind of their like who they really are. And so um yeah, I think it's more obviously with film it's more visual, but I think it's just using other mediums, rather than um inner monologue like we were talking about. It's more about, their environment and what we can see. Um so yeah, and I wonder, um
Right.
you brought up that you wrote some screenplays. I wonder, how how you were with writing screenplays versus writing, nonfiction, creative nonfiction or short stories. I wonder like how that has been for you.
I think probably when I was in my 20s, and then I wrote several in my 20s and then came back to it later on. A, um, I'd had a short story published, and I wrote a screenplay based on the short story.
Yeah.
Kind of wanted to transfer that. Yeah, I think getting older, I've wanted to explore characters more and go into their heads, and the voice has become a stronger thing than the as I said earlier, the furniture of fiction, like having dialogue and having being a certain way and
Yeah.
having setting up a scene. And, even though I'm doing those things, I'm coming at it, I feel like with even this last novel I wrote, I just dive right into the character, and these other things emerge from that later on, perhaps, and I'm not using any quotation marks, it's just kind of more italicized within the paragraphs. Um, so it's all really just run through the character, and I don't know, maybe it's just getting older, right? Maybe I just like that more now rather than having to deal with the rules that um, writing a screenplay or writing a more formulaic story will make me do. 'Cause, the three acts and the three acts in a screenplay and 30 minutes in, the character changes or the story changes and heads in this different direction and all of that.
Yeah.
Which I think, at the same time, having that background and having that within you and you learning that now, I think allows you to do these other things later on, but it's still in your core and it's still probably in your thinking in some way. So it's going to emerge in whatever way it does, but I think it's still within it. I think having a lot of tension, as we mentioned earlier, tension or conflict, I still have that in what I'm writing,
Yeah.
even though there's a strong voice. So these basic rules are still there. And I guess as an art, I'm not an artist, a fine artist, but
Yeah.
learning drawing, figure drawing, getting all that stuff down before you do something abstract. I think most artists would say, yes, you need to know these basics first before you head off in your own direction.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree because it's the foundation. And even, even to me, I'm still learning that foundation because, I think, this is just from personal experience, but also I think it's just kind of a common thing that happens when I think people go to school for these creative art fields that they're so quick to kind of defy these common rules. And which is fine because I hate rules. I'm totally down for breaking the rules, but um I sometimes have to, pull myself back and realize, do I even understand truly three-act structure? Like, do I even understand these core fundamentals? Because I just feel like if I don't, then I'm never really gonna master writing or whatever it may be. And so, saying that, I also am a big proponent of, like I was just saying earlier, breaking the rules. And especially with like screenplays, I think are so interesting because a screenplay is a very set way of being written. Because I think, which I mean, other forms have that as well, but I use screenplay as an example because I think it's a very easy thing to look at. Like these are written in a very particular way. Um, but also I think even within that, I've seen some really cool things, not only going to school for it, but I think, with the age of social media, everyone can just post their art,
Yeah.
and I see some very interesting things, like I'm a big fan of kind of anti-plot narratives. I think they're fascinating because I think we're so used to three-act structure, which is perfectly fine. But I think when I watch a film or maybe read a screenplay that has a anti-plot or maybe a more ambiguous story or ending, it kind of intrigues me because it's not the norm, right? And so
Yeah.
I wonder, I bring that up because I wonder if if experimented with anything of that nature, especially just to see like where you can take things and certain ideas and certain story ideas that you've had.
Yeah. I think both of, again, going back to my last two novels, I think both of them very interior,
Mm,
very much not again, the dialogue isn't, I don't have, they're quotes and one character speaks and next character speaks.
yeah.
It's kind of run into the paragraphs themselves. I which you know, I've had some people, the first one of these novels, some people have said it feels unrelenting. It's hard to read in that way.
Yeah.
But I don't think I also don't want to make it so experimental that e nobody wants to read it, right? There's
Yeah.
still stories within it, and th- I can't I don't like reading like that either. I can read something like that for 5 pages, but you don't want to read a whole novel of it as
Yeah.
well. And so I think I try to balance those two things. Like, how can I still keep the reader's interest, but still play with the language? So yeah, these past two novels, and they're almost it's almost like one is a sequel to the other in a way.
Yeah.
Um, but I've really just gone, in that direction with those two. And as we talked about that story that you read online, humility, it's second person.
Yeah. Which is really
So
interesting
that
to me.
Yeah, and so, how can I make, I always tell my students, it's second person. If you're going to use it, go ahead and experiment with it, but can you still ground it in some kind of character to make it have some kind of connection for the reader? Or
Yeah.
are you just playing with the form? Nothing wrong with that, but I think having that grounding and having the playfulness too, I think balancing those two is something to do. I mean, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
not an easy thing to do. Some of my, like an earlier novel I'd written, and I'd sent it out to a bunch of agents and just publishing houses. And a lot of the comments I got said, well, what's the tension in here? I'm not getting it right away. And I think people, like you were saying, I think we just need to have a certain form. We need to have that tension. We need to have a certain structure. Unless you know, unless you're playing with it in such a way that the voice is so strong that somebody's going to read it
Yeah.
because of that. But maybe we're all expecting that now
Yeah.
because,
We're so used to it, you know.
yeah.
You said something earlier that kind of was interesting. Your last two novels, you said that one of them was kind of a sequel to one of them in another, one way and another. And I
Hmm.
kind of wonder, that makes me wonder, do you have certain reoccurring themes or questions that you keep having to bring up in your writing?
That's a good question. I think so, in that trying to process the world on a daily basis, right? And coming at it from my own philosophical and also ironic way, like those two things, and commenting on the world through those lenses. I think I try to always do. And these novels, again, seem both like autofiction. So I'm,
Yeah,
just thinly disguising my life. Of course, you go in different directions to investigate fiction more. But I think I'm always, as you're saying, you started looking at each day and the things that happen in each day and trying to strain those through some kind of lens. And I think I'm trying to constantly do that as well through my irony, and but also thinking about it vertically in this deeper level.
yeah,
I once had a student evaluation that said, Professor Bergstraesser, his class is full of serious contemplation, but also deadpan humor. And I thought to myself that I can die now. I've done all that I can do in a classroom. So, um, yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
it does. And I think, and it kind of all goes back to that word positioning, maybe, what your job is or what reoccurring themes that you have throughout your life experiences. Another one I wanted to ask too, since, we live in a very we live in this near place, Do you find the place that we live in, the Mountain West region of the United States, particularly Wyoming, shapes your writing, maybe character settings or tone in a noticeable way? Because I can say from firsthand experience, it totally does. Everything I write takes place in Montana, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming. Because this is where I live. I can't imagine it anywhere else. I have no idea how it is to live in New England. I have no idea how it is to live in the Midwest, the Pacific, the Pacific West, you know. So I just wonder how this region is for you and how it affects your writing.
Yeah. Um, it's affected my reading a lot more than my writing at this
Mm,
point. Every summer when classes end, I just start reading stuff about the Great Plains and about Wyoming, and whether it be like Native American writing
yeah,
or, that has really started to intrigue me because I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. So being here near the mountains, and as you know, just the rolling plains, which have, you know, when I first moved here, I thought, oh my God, it's this godforsaken land. There's nothing growing out here. But
yeah,
then being here 18 years, I mean, I think the land starts to speak to you in certain ways, and
yeah,
you notice things that you wouldn't notice otherwise. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I do a lot of reading. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the writers that I've been. Paul Gruchow, he's
mm,
a the Necessity of Empty Places is one of his books that I um, really became enamored of last year. Dan O'Brien, he started a buffalo ranch in South Dakota.
mm,
Basically, you can still, if you like to eat buffalo meat, I do sometimes, but not often, but you can order it from him. But he decided to move away from cattle and started this buffalo ranch, and it talks about his whole process of doing that, but just also keeping the land, you know, keeping it more natural that way. Like that's how it used to be. And rather than bringing cattle on and having a cattle farm, and all of his neighbors were very suspect of what he was doing in
yeah,
terms of that. So yeah, it hasn't, I've been doing a lot of that. I think it hasn't, in terms of the places in my writing, it hasn't seeped in as much, but I
mm,
know it's there in the background. Maybe I think my characters talk about nature and just you know, how smaller things like a cloud or bird, walking by a bush full of birds and how it's just like throbbing with birds, right?
yeah,
Something like that, like having my characters look at the world in that way. And I think how I've started
mm,
to perceive nature in the world in that way has come into my characters and how they're perceiving the world, but actually using it as a setting, not as much at this point, but
mm.
I know that it will probably emerge in some way at some point.
Yeah, and speaking of, influences, I suppose. Another one I really wanted to ask was, what writers have influenced you? It's a very, very broad question, but
Yeah,
I think it's interesting though to see like where we get some of our inspiration from, or maybe, certain writing styles from. Some of the main ones I can remember very, very well, for me were Langston Hughes and Cormac McCarthy were were
yeah,
were two of like I took a I took a English literature class when I went to community college because after high school I had no idea what I was gonna do with my life. I was like, I'm gonna go community college because I don't know what I'm gonna do. And during during when I was doing my core classes, I took an English literature class, and one of the short stories we had to read was Salvation by Langston Hughes. And it was a amazing short story, and I was just like really enamored by it. And so, just stuff like that, it just and then, the themes and ideas in that short story have just kind of impressed on me throughout my whole life. And I always kind of have those novels or short stories in the back of my head whenever I write because they're kind of like
mhm.
what has made me the writer that I am, the creative that I am. And so I wonder, what those are for you.
Let me start with my main one, and over my whole career, as I was saying earlier, I think I had writers at certain times, and then I put them
Yeah.
aside and remember them as old relationships, and then you meet new people, through books,
Hmm.
and you have this relationship, and it's a whole smattering of those over my life. Latest one though is Thomas Bernhard.
Mm.
He's an Austrian writer, and I started reading him about 4 years ago, and he um, kind of blew out of the water the way I think about fiction and how to write it. And I think studying poetry and writing
Yeah.
poetry for 5 years and Bernhard, I think were the two things that shifted my writing into these latest two novels. Um, and his right, yeah, he just dives right in, and like
Yeah.
some of, and again, this idea of it being unrelenting, some people might not like it. Like some of his books are all just one paragraph
Yeah.
without even any paragraph breaks. But again, I don't know. It somehow really appealed to me, and it's not annoyingly experimental either. You can still feel these characters. It's kind of this dark pessimism too, like dark humor, this pessimism that really, appeals, almost this anti-hero feeling to it, which really
Mm,
appeals to me.
that's cool.
Um, Back in the day, I mean, back when I was in my 20s, it was probably Henry Miller. I don't know if anyone even reads or teaches Henry Miller anymore.
Yeah.
Uh,
I have not heard of them.
Check out Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn.
Okay.
See if you see what you think.
Okay.
Or the Jack Kerouac, that was the Beat generation. I think in my 20s, I really appreciated that. Um, Kafka is always, have you read any Kafka at all?
I have not read any Kafka.
Okay. He, again, his style has won, I guess, this questioning what bureaucracy is, but doing it also in this with his dark humor.
Mm,
Um, Again, he's from 100 years ago too. So,
yeah.
but one of my core writers, I think. Some newer ones, um, Richard Wagamese. He's a First Nations Indian writer, and his writing, he has a book called Medicine Walk, which it's a lot like Cormac McCarthy's writing, which
Mm,
yeah, I went through my whole Cormac McCarthy phase as well
yeah.
when I was younger, but always trying to find people who write like him as well, and he's one who I've really gotten into recently. Jenny Offel, Offill, is she's contemporary. I like how her writing is a little bit more experimental, like her story is maybe little paragraphs, almost little like
Mm,
flash stories that all almost are like a collage and they come together to form the meaning in her novel.
mm.
A lot of Zen writing too. I've been into over my lifetime, and it kind of bubbles up every now and then, and I'll go in that direction, and then it'll disappear, and then it'll come back. Bill Porter and his I guess his Zen name is Red Pine. He does these travel logs that are around China that are really interesting. He went searching for hermits in the mountains of China in the 1990s and found that they're still there. They're still just living there. You think it's something from, you know, hundreds of years ago, but
Yeah.
he just interviewed and went exploring the mountains of China and found these hermits who are still just living alone up there, which appeals to me.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
It's really cool you kind of brought up those that travel log because I think it brings up a really good memory of mine. I I learned to write by reading other people's work. I just read and just see how other people write and kind of take bits and pieces, steal, I just see how people
Yeah.
write and the way that people use words. And I remember, I am a history, I do, minor studies in history while I'm here. And sometimes, we'll have to write argumentative essay, and then you have to go to the archives and try to find primary sources, secondary sources. And I've actually learned, I've taken a lot of my writing style, I think, from primary sources of contemporary history. So, post World War II, and just seeing how certain people wrote about actual like how about their actual lives. I remember one time using the archive to find journal logs of American soldiers in Vietnam and just seeing the way
Mhm.
that they would write about their lives. And it was so bleak and pessimistic, and but they used so many interesting words to describe how much they hated being in Vietnam. And I just think like that was just, learned even new words just from reading those. And so like I think there are unique ways to find ideas or to even learn more about writing. And so it's very interesting how you just brought it up and just reminded me. And one it also makes me think of this question that, you know, as we get older, and I can only speak at my ripe age of 20, but I wonder, especially with you've had a long career of writing, I wonder, how do you balance your creative ambitions as your life just naturally progresses, maybe once you had a family, once you get married, once you have maybe a job that isn't necessarily creative writing at its whole. And so I wonder, like, how do you balance that, and what have you done as time has gone on?
I think, I mean, you have to keep it at the forefront in a certain way. I mean, yes, I remember in my 20s, between undergrad and going back to grad school, I was living in an apartment with my two friends, and it was always, the big three things were how are you going to make a living? Because all of us were, I was working at a bookstore and, making a living, having some kind of relationship, and then also being creative. So we always said, how can we keep these three things in balance with each other? Um, and maybe that's always kind of stuck with me, right? Like you have to make time for it in a certain way. It might not be every day. I'm not a person who says, "Oh, I have to write my 3 hours every afternoon or something
Yeah,
like that," right? I, sometimes it'll merge as a teacher. My
yeah,
summer's pretty free.
yeah,
So anybody out there, whoever watches this, if you want to really have time to write and become a teacher, right? Even if you're a high school teacher or elementary school and you still want to be creative, you have that summer. There's the free time to let your mind roam and go in different directions. But I would say going into this career really helped me. It's important to other people in my colleagues in the English department, writing is an important thing, right? Like that's what they've staked their lives on. And if you work in an insurance agency, there might not be people who care about it as much. So I think
exactly.
coming into being in this field, the people around me think it's an important thing. So it makes you keep doing it. It makes it feel important to you. I mean, there's so many times I felt like I just can't the end of the semester. It's like I don't want to read any writing. I don't want to read student writing. I don't want to write. I don't want to read anything. But then
Yeah,
it all just starts bubbling up again. So I think it's okay to have those moments as well. I think in our society we're forced to say, "Oh, this is my passion. It's going to be my passion forever. I'm always going to be in love with it." I don't think that's true at all. I think in
yeah,
life there are just so many cyclical moments, right? Where sometimes you just hate it, you don't want to do it, and other times it emerges again.
yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree with I remember pressuring myself so much to be like, okay, you really need to find out what you're gonna do and go to school for it. And I was like, whatever I'm gonna go to school for is like, I'm spending all
That's
this
it.
damn money. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah,
And I've kind of came to terms now that like, even though I go to school for film, I really don't think I don't think filmmaking is gonna be my entire career. There's so many other, you know, alleyways and virtues out there that I kind of want to explore. So I've kind of came to terms with just realizing that I will have a degree in this, but I don't think that is going to make me a filmmaker because 20 years from now I could be doing something completely else, and that's just the way it goes, right? And I think it's interesting too.
Yeah.
And I also completely agree with, those moments of just not wanting to do it anymore. I I I I specifically find that within editing, which is, a whole different thing. But like
Mhm.
sometimes when I edit my short films, I'm just like, God, I'm just so done. But you're right, it always then comes bubbling back up. So I think, breaks are obviously important and it, it will always come naturally back. I think those things, writing, whatever it may be, they always come naturally back. And
I
one
agree.
one final question I kind of wanted to ask you was, what's something that you wish more people, and I would add here more specifically students understood about the creative writing process, especially people who may be, coming into your intro to writing classes, or people who maybe just students who just want to start writing. What is something that you wish that these people that these students would know about starting to write in that creative process and how it can be?
I think making sure that students read. And as I said, I think we started this whole conversation with I became a writer because I really started reading heavily and just being invested in reading.
Yeah,
So I try to bring that to class, right? Like, try to get them, I don't give them novels in a creative writing class necessarily, but at least bring in all these different styles and have them read many pages of it, right? And just try
yeah,
to get that feeling. I mean, it's so hard in our world, right? I mean, it's just this distractions, right? The constant distractions and sitting down to read something that's even 10 pages might even feel like a chore,
yeah,
right? And I mean, there are probably students like you who love it, who are going to do it, but everyone is distracted
yeah,
by, I mean, there are 100 other things you could be doing right now. Why am I reading this story? And hopefully by doing that, by just reading, they'll find at least one writer who speaks to them in some way and
yeah.
who, okay, and maybe the student can feel, okay, this is what writing is all about. And maybe I can somehow have a piece of that in a certain way, even if it's not going to be published. I can still have that feeling of what it's like to read this and then write myself and write something myself that mirrors this, or that just getting that feeling of writing a
Exactly.
story
Yeah.
or
It
having
just gives you
having
that
a great
feeling.
line. Like I wrote this great line today, and it just kind of resonates with you, and you think about that line that you wrote the next day, and there's something, something deeply moving about that, I think. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah, I was just thinking that in my head when you were talking about being able just to replicate that feeling. Because, I've read short stories and screenplays, and they kind of give me a feeling. I'm like, wow, like I want to be able to create that feeling through my own work. And,
Hmm.
there have been moments, you know, either making a film or writing something where I do get that feeling, and it makes it all worth it, even if it's just me that gets that feeling.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not big on sending out things for people to read because in my mind, no one gives a shit. So I kind of keep it to myself. And even then, it's just worth it because it's like now I know I have that ability. Because I think a lot of people, when they get into writing or filmmaking, whatever it may be, they don't think they can capture that. Maybe like the people that they admire or are inspired by. But I think anybody can capture that feeling. You just have to realize what you're really into and what you want to write or, you know, write a story about.
And think about writing as even just taking a hike, or just going out and hiking for an hour, and just the kind of feeling that, if you like hiking, right? But
Yeah,
just that kind of feeling that it gives you, right? The sense of peace, a sense of, losing your mind in a different way, or having your mind go in different directions. Maybe writing a story is like that. Maybe it doesn't always have to be, I'm going to publish this. It's going to be I need people to see it, but it's just that feeling that it gives you yourself.
exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Professor, I think this was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was neat.
thanks for coming on again. I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about writing and all the multifaceted things that come with it.
Well, I'm glad to see people out there who still love it, right? Like in a world of AI and whatever direction we're headed, actually having students like you who still think about writing in these more, God, it seems more quaint ways. I don't know with what AI is going to bring to us. I have no idea. I don't. Let's not even go in that direction now. But yeah, it's good to
Yeah,
see that you're interested in this and want to keep telling stories and thinking about writing in this way. Well, nice to talk with you, Broden, and good luck with your studies.
I say the same to you. So thank you,
Okay.
Professor. Have a good one.